Hello and welcome back to my channel, Project Professionals. If you think project management is just about scope and schedule, you are missing out on the most critical element, that is people. Today, we are breaking down PMP Stakeholder Management, the difference between a smooth delivery and a constant project friction. So let's dive right into it. What are stakeholders, how to identify them, how to manage the stakeholder plan that you might already know by now. How do you manage the stakeholder engagement? And finally, how do you control the stakeholder engagement? So let's look into each one of them individually. So first of all, who is a stakeholder? What a stakeholder is anyone who's positively or negatively impacted by the project, or anyone who can exert influence over it. And this is the key takeaway. Stakeholders are not always cheering for you. And that is the key takeaway. Stakeholders are not always cheering for you. They can be positive or negative. Positive stakeholders are supporters who gain from the project success, and the negative stakeholders are those who perceive a loss or whose objectives conflict with others. So, those are negative stakeholders. The crucial first step, the moment you realize your project charter. So, you see the project charter, you develop it during the very initiation phase, and then immediately you do the identification of stakeholders. You can't plan to engage them until you know exactly who they are. So, what is identifying stakeholders? It says the who. This is where you document names, roles, and initial interest levels. Then you plan stakeholder engagement. By now, you already know what is planning any project management plan. That is the how. This is where you design strategies to effectively involve everyone. Do we need a weekly update, a monthly presentation, or just an email is good to go? Once you have that, you manage the stakeholder engagement. This is the execution phase. Communicating, working with them, and resolving any issue that arise. And finally, you monitor stakeholder management or control stakeholder management. What is it? It's the checkpoint. Are our strategies working? Are our strategies working? Are our stakeholders still supporting us? So you do everything in the control and monitoring phase, that is control stakeholder engagement. And here's a tip. You must periodically review that plan. Stakeholders change and their influence shifts, and your strategy needs to be adapted. Now that we know the process flow, let's get into the two most powerful tools for effective engagement: prioritization and analysis. To prioritize, we first look at their stake in the project. Why do they care? What do they stand to gain or lose in the project? Their interests, their rights, their ownership, their knowledge and contribution to the project. So prioritization is power, influence, and impact, right? And that is something which we call as stakeholder analysis. How much power do they have, influence they have in the project, and the impact. The power is their formal authority to approve or block the decision. Their influence is informal ability to survey opinions even without formal power. Impact, the magnitude of the effect they can have on the project success or failure. And now the analysis models. So we have analysis models to map these traits and visualize our strategies. One is power interest grade, or influence impact grade, or power impact grade. So there are a lot of grades. Let's look at the interest power grade. How do you do it? How do you read it, and how do you put stakeholders into this grid? So it is the 2x2 grid. The most common are the power interest grid and the power influence grid, and the influence impact grid. The goal is simple: plot them on a quadrant to determine if you need to manage them closely, keep them satisfied, keep them informed, or you need to monitor them, right? So there might be people who are falling under manage closely. For example, if there's a CEO of a company or an organization, they have high power, high interest in the project. So you have to manage these stakeholders closely. On the other hand, you might have stakeholders whom you just have to keep satisfied, who has high power but low interest in your project. Others are, for example, your team members. You have to keep them in loop. You have to keep them informed and updated in everything, because they have high interest in the project, because they are doing the work. They are the ones who are doing the work. However, they have low power or authority, so you keep them informed or updated. And then there are uh, people whom you just have to monitor, who has low interest and low power. I hope this is very clear to you. Let's move on to salience model. This is a more complex tool that assesses stakeholders' importance using three overlapping factors. One is power, another one is urgency, and legitimacy. Now, power, we already know who and what are power stakeholders. Urgency is the degree to which their needs require immediate attention. And legitimacy, the validity of their claim or involvement. Based on these overlaps, we categorize them further. For example, dominant. Dominant is nothing but power plus legitimacy, right? You see number 4, that is dominant, who falls under, they have power and the request or validity is legitimate. So they are dominant stakeholders. Now there are dangerous stakeholders, who has power and who's pushing you to do it quickly, urgently, and get it done. So those are dangerous stakeholders. And then there are dependent stakeholders, who has the urgency and also they are legit. So they are dependent stakeholders. The takeaway is simple: we must engage stakeholders throughout the project. Doesn't matter which category they fall under: power, urgency, legitimacy. However, we just prioritize their requests according to which category they fall under. For example, if they don't have power and they are just getting demanding, or they are showing urgency, ignore them. Totally ignore them. Or you so those are the people you have to be careful of, right? Speaking of influence and prioritization, let's look at the specific dimensions we use to classify them and where their influence actually comes from. So here are the stakeholder influence, stakeholder analysis influence. We classify stakeholders to determine how much time and energy to spend on them. On the salience model, or the grid I showed you in the earlier slide, according to them, we look at the three main dimensions: interest, influence, and involvement. Either of the model you choose. You focus on interest, influence, and involvement overall. Now, directional influence, where the power flows. The PMP exam loves to test if you know the difference between the source of influence or not. We categorize it into 4 directions: upward influence, downward influence, outward influence, sideways influence. So let's look at each one of them. Upward influence. These are the senior management, sponsors, or executives, the people above you on the organizational chart, including the steering committee and functional managers. What are downward influencers? These are the people you manage or direct your team members. For example, the SMEs, the consultants, the team members, etc. They basically deliver the tasks for the project. Outward influence. It is nothing but anyone outside of your project team, your suppliers, your vendors, and government agencies or regulations for that matter. And finally, the sideward influence. Uh, these are peers at the same level, most often other project managers who may compete for resources. Your goal is to understand that some stakeholders are inherently more important than the others based on their power and influence, which is why we spend so much time analyzing them. When you meet with your stakeholders, don't just tell them what you are doing. Instead, focus on 2 things: how the project will affect them and the concept of co creation. You want them to become partners in the solution. This is especially true for your key stakeholders, those with a decision making or management role, and your primary customers, of course. Once we know who they are and how powerful they are, the next step in planning is assessing their current engagement level. Where do they stand right now? To build your engagement plan, you need to know a stakeholder's current attitude towards the project. This is assessed on a spectrum. So let's look at the stakeholder engagement levels. There are different levels. There are people or stakeholders who are totally unaware of the situation, who are resistant. Maybe some of them are neutral, and the rest are either supportive or leading. So let's look at each one of them individually. Who are unaware stakeholders? They don't know the project exists. Simply, they don't know the project exists. Strategy, just inform them. Resistant. They know the project but actively opposes it. Now, what's the strategy to handle them? Negotiate and mitigate. Mitigate, you might have already seen my video on mitigation, risk responses, and everything. So if you have not, go back to my video and check out what is mitigation, how to mitigate it, and how to handle it. Now, next comes the neutral type of stakeholders. They know the project but don't care either way. Strategy, the quadrant we saw. What do? We monitor these stakeholders, right? And now there are positive stakeholders who are supportive or leading. Supportive stakeholders, they are helpful and willing to assist. And the strategy to maintain them is maintain closely. And leading stakeholders, they are actively promoting the project. And the best strategy for them is empower them and utilize them. Now, what are the data gathering tools? To execute your plan, we use several techniques: data gathering, data analysis, and decision making. Use tools like benchmarking, which we just learned earlier in our um, previous video. What is benchmarking? Comparing your practices to others. We also learned about brainwriting in one of our videos, which is nothing but passing written ideas around to build upon them to collect information. Now, what is data analysis? Using the outputs from your stakeholder analysis, like the grids and salience we just saw, along with the alternative analysis, evaluating the options, and the root cause analysis we learned in the previous video. If you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it. You'll know all these terms. So root cause analysis is nothing but determining why a problem is occurring. It is also known as fishbone diagram, if you remember. Why is it called fishbone diagram? Because it looks like a fishbone diagram, and where you go reach to the core cause of the issue to resolve it. And finally, the decision making. This includes the prioritization. Some stakeholders are simply more important than others and require more attention. Period. These traditional tools set the stage. But if your project lives in an agile environment, the rule changes. But the goal, turning stakeholders into advocates, remains the same. So let's look into how it is managed in agile approach. In agile, we toss out the heavy documentation and replace it with communication and transparency. Communication and stakeholders go hand in hand. Schedule interactive communication. Stakeholders are actively invited to planning meetings and daily scrums. We purely focus on transparency, inspection, and adaptation. We focus on making information visible to stakeholders so stakeholders can constantly inspect the progress and the team can adapt based on their feedback. For example, the sprint reviews. What do? We communicate with them. We communicate with the stakeholders in order to have transparency and get their feedback early upon so that we can inspect and adapt. And lastly, emotional intelligence is the key. The project manager's ability to navigate these high frequency emotional interactions is paramount. Okay, the agile approach replaces the traditional detailed project charter with the agile team charter. This document is designed to be broad and high level, and the whole team approves it. So in predictive also, we do have team charter if your organization is following. So you might already know it's a detailed documentation, who'll do what, who's responsible for what, the roles and responsibilities, and it's a detailed project team charter. Here in Agile, it is broad and high level, not who will do what and the rules and responsibilities, because in Agile, we believe in not directing them, but taking the tasks independently as a contributor. It focuses on how the team will work. The vision statement, of course, team rules and code of conduct, communication rules, just like predictive. Uh, but here, the difference is we also add the definition of done, the success factor. So this could be one of the questions. Definition of done is crafted way before the project starts. It's in the Agile team charter, not after we start working. So definition of done is crafted in Agile team charter. The DoD is single, consistent set of quality requirements applied to all tasks. We focus on the ultimate outcome that defines the success. Whether you are using traditional PMP processes or the fast collaborative Agile approach, remember this. Stakeholder management is about proactive engagement, and it is a continuous process. By analyzing their stakes, knowing their engagement level, and using an appropriate charter, you turn potential obstacles into project advocates. Hit that like button if this breakdown helped you see your project's people side more clearly. Next time, we'll dive deep into the procurement management.